Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the July 19, 2016 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are copies of our agenda on either side of the room. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to pick up a copy and you can follow along with tonight's proceedings. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to things that are on our agenda tonight, as well as a segment under item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. At that juncture, the members of the audience will be given an opportunity to come to the podium and raise questions or make comments of a general nature with respect to things not on tonight's agenda. At that time, the protocol will be to introduce yourself, and we'll welcome hearing from you at that time. It is our proud custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, so I'd like to ask everyone to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I hate to have to do this again. In fact, it's very sad that we have to do so, but I'd like to ask everyone to remain standing for a moment of silence and recognition for the 3 Baton Rouge police officers who were killed in the line of duty recently. This is unfortunate and tragic continuation of something we had to do last week, and I hope we see a stop to it soon. It's really a shame that our first responders are being sought out and killed for doing nothing but their jobs and wearing the uniform. A moment of silence for the officers killed in Baton Rouge, please. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask our village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Here.
Commissioner White.
Here.
Commissioner Fatimo. Here. Commissioner Jose.
Here.
Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner Burnett.
Here.
Mayor Tully.
Here. Thank you. That brings us to item 3, which pertains to minutes of prior council meeting minutes. We have one set of minutes to review and approve tonight. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections or changes to our regular village council meeting minutes from July 12, 2016? If not, may I have a motion to approve them?
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the July 12, 2016 minutes as presented.
Second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. And with that, we are at item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. If there are any members of the audience that have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things not on tonight's agenda, I would invite you to please come down to the podium, introduce yourself, and we would welcome hearing from you. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Tully, commissioners, staff. I'm Gordon Goodman. I live at 5834 Meadow. I'm getting ready to go out to Boulder for a couple months and help my grandson celebrate his bar mitzvah. And so I'm trying to clean up various things. And at the end of 2014, the hospital came in with a general plan of development for its properties. And at that time, I pointed out that the buffer zones that had been set up 25 years earlier to protect Lyman Woods in an approval from the council for development on the hospital property had not been maintained at all over those periods. Instead of protecting Lyman Woods, they now are places where exotic species grow and can propagate into the woods. So at that time, we had an extended discussion with the representatives of the hospital, the attorney representing it, and as a part of this, I proposed that the condition for granting the approval of the hospital's plan would include provision requiring an arrangement for maintenance of the buffer zones. The hospital felt that that was inappropriate, and the council agreed when the hospital provided us a letter expressing their intent to work out something informally to achieve this same goal of maintenance of the exotic species in the buffer zones. Well, that's a year and a half at least ago now, and during the first year, 2015, there were discussions between the 3 owners of Lyman Woods, the village, the Park District, and the Forest Preserve District. The Forest Preserve District drew up a 5-year plan for achieving this maintenance of the areas, And when we looked at it, it seemed a very reasonable cost that could be shared by the three owners. But there was no agreement to actually implement this. So the manager of the village took the lead for that 2015 period, and at the end of it, he said that there wasn't enough staff time and effort available in the village to continue with that. So the mayor said that he would convene, or at least talk to the heads of all the agencies, the hospital, the park district, the forest preserve district, and as the head of the village, see if the chief executives of this organization could reach something. And so my question tonight is, what is the status of this ongoing saga, and how close are we to actually having an agreement that will permit the maintenance of these buffer areas? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Goodman. I appreciate you keeping tabs on this. There have been some preliminary conversations with the leadership of most of the groups that you just mentioned, and there was tentative interest in pursuing it. It's somewhat of a matter of herding cats and staying on top of it at multiple pressure points, and that continues is probably the best way I can describe it. So it's not forgotten, but still moving forward, but perhaps at a simmer rather than a boil. That's the best way I can describe it. But not still on the list. Thank you. I appreciate that. Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to matters of a general nature? Item not on tonight's agenda.
Good
Good evening,
Mayor,
welcome.
Council, Bob Peterson, 6861 Camden Road, Downers Grove. And I just got a few questions. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the last 2 or 3 meetings of out-of-town emergencies I had to attend, but I just have a couple of general questions in regards to the new project that's going up on Maple and Main. Looking at the housing project or the apartment complex that's going up, it appears that the front door is right on the corner of Main and Maple. My question is how does a taxi or limo pick up a customer going to the airport? Because it looks like the front door is just offset from the sidewalk, maybe about 5-10 feet. And who gets the ticket, from Maple or Main, for picking up a customer? Because it doesn't look like it appear that there's enough room to pull a limo in there to pick up a customer.
I believe there's space to do that on Maple, if I
Maybe there
recall
is.
correctly.
That's- From what I saw on there, it didn't appear. And in regards to the underground parking that they have, they shortened it up and they narrowed it up. Is there any provisions for extra areas for maybe a little bit bigger car as to how they measured for a car, the car itself, or from the mirrors themselves, so that the car next door, when you get out of the car, even in the parking spots downtown over here, you kind of bang the other car. I try to always park out in the middle of nowhere so nobody hits my car. And I'm guessing that something seriously needs to be looked into as far as parking, because let's say in the next few years, I'm guessing there's going to be approximately between 400 to 500 apartments or condo spaces to be renting out in the downtown section with all the projects of construction that are going to be going in here. Is there enough parking for all of this and people coming in as far as visiting, shopping? Is there any plans for available parking for all these people? As the lady from the Main Street store, I think it's the Spice store, how many parking spots are going to be lost? And probably even Friday night car shows is going to have to be shortened up with the number of parking spots. And I understand, I was able to listen to last week on Thursday a little bit of the trying to maintain the oldness of Downers Grove. And the apartment buildings that are going up, I don't know if there ever was an ordinance, I think there was at one time, to kind of conform to the area of either housing, or I don't know if it pertains to apartment buildings, to conform kind of to the area. The Seavers building right now on Main and Maple, right next to the parking lot that's there, is a nice-looking building. It's a vintage looking of the old-style building, and the new stuff that's going in is basically a box and a plain Jane. If there's a little pizzazz to it, it might be more appealing to the residents. But just to put in a couple of boxes over there, the old Carlson paint store is almost an eyesore because it's just plain bricks sticking out on Main Street and the side street there of whatever it is. And maybe with some of these new projects that are coming up as far as design, is there any requirement of maybe putting in 2 or 3 sample drawings of what they want to put in to have somebody go across versus just, here's a drawing, this is what we want to put in, that's what we do, done. I don't know if sample drawings are submitted and you have a choice of 2 or 3, what's going to look nice in the area and less complaints out of the residents. And that's what I'm hearing so far. And let's see, I think one other, because right now, I hope that it doesn't follow the same ordinance. The sad part about it is, I grew up in Downers Grove here as a little kid, born and raised just a block away. And what we had then was nothing to what we have now, and it's kind of sad that all that stuff has gone away because big business, for one, chased them all out. On Main Street, there was 5 gas stations, 5 car dealerships. You had Sears, you had WF Woolworths, and all the old-fashioned type style buildings and stores. Some are still there with new modern stores. But everything that is being replaced in a over 100-year-old town is all plain. A little pizzazz to it would make a big effect on the town itself than trying to maintain the old town. If you go through a town and half is new and half is old, it just doesn't look the same. And that's my, biggest letdown with Downers Grove right now is growing up as a little kid as to what was then and what was now. I remember playing inside this building, sneaking in under the fence as it was the old Schaefer Bearing building. Now it's City Hall. And the same way up and down the street. All the houses that were there, they're all gone and replaced with just plain and simple structures and submitting some drawings as to what's going to be going in with all the projects that are upcoming of all the apartments and condos that are going in. So a little something to spice it up to make it look a little bit different. If you get past the Severs building, what that looks like in the area as to compare to what's going in after you tear that down. So, thank you.
Thanks for sharing your opinions. Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to items of a general nature, things not on tonight's agenda?
Good evening.
Welcome.
Scott Curran, 4826 Stanley. I came just to say thank you. And I apologize for the redundancy of the email I sent earlier. I wasn't expecting to make it. My first time ever in person at one of these meetings. It's nice to see you all live and in high definition. I usually watch online, number one. A few weeks back, actually probably a couple months ago now, we called the village as a result of sort of a sinking of our parkway area, resulting from some work that was done 2 years ago to relocate some fire hydrants and some water-related infrastructure, and it had sunk substantially in several neighboring yards. And so on behalf of several of my neighbors, I called and asked if somebody could come and put more dirt than I was able to haul from Wanamaker's on my own and fill it in. Otherwise, I'd have been happy to do that. And they said, we're not sure, it'll depend when we get the dirt from the county, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, the next day, 5 of our neighbors, all, including myself, all had leveled black dirt and grass seed planted just in time for early spring. And we were all super happy about it. And so I figured you all should know. So to everybody who was responsible for it, I also want to apologize to the 2 guys who I stopped on the south side of the tracks a few weeks ago and asked if they both worked for the village. And they were a little worried, and I just said I swear to tell a compliment, but they were sincerely frightened that morning, so I apologize to whoever they were. And while I'm here, and it's like on a different topic, I just want to say thanks to everybody, especially Mayor Tully, for the work everybody did to make the Dick Van Dyke event happen. I was just a volunteer. I was a volunteer advisor to the charities that it was benefiting, and I volunteer like anybody else who's here. And it would not have happened without local support. The entire team that was putting it on was from California, And I said, you can't do it in the weekend of Grove Fest without local buy-in, or it could either be a, wow, this is amazing, look, Dick Van Dyke and the Tivoli, the weekend of Grove Fest, that's amazing, or it could have been, who thought that was a good idea? And so I want to compliment everybody, village staff, Mayor Tully. I know that, within appropriate bounds, you said, whatever it takes, let's do what we can. You marshal the resources of the village, staff, the police, Rotary, and compliments to Rotary as well. But those are two amazing things. One was on a very local level on our block, so I'm here on behalf of 5 families on Stanley to say thank you. And I really thought Downers Grove was really in good form the weekend of the Dick Van Dyke event. So now I'm going to go put my kids to bed. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate those kind words and you sharing that, and you're too modest to not underscore your own role in making that event a big success, and thank you for bringing it and making sure that it was here in Downers Grove. Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? General questions or comments? Very good. Well, those who spoke, we appreciate it. That'll allow us to move on to item 5, our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from any members of the audience on any of tonight's consent agenda items? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The consent agenda passes unanimously, and that brings us to our active agenda. We have 2 items on tonight's active agenda. First item is 6A as in Apple. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance authorizing a loan agreement with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance authorizing a loan agreement between the Village of Downers Grove and the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank staff again for bringing this forward. I know I was in Manager Fieldman's ear from right about the time I was elected about this particular program, and I'm glad that it made sense. I think once before we've taken advantage of this loan program, and we're doing it again. So thanks for staying on top of that and helping save the village a few bucks. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously and brings us to the next item, which is item 6B as in boy. Do I have a motion to adopt a resolution amending an official village policy regarding ethical standards, Exhibit 2?
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt a resolution amending an official Village Council policy regarding ethical standards as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Waldeck?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very happy that to see this policy move forward, come to a conclusion. The previous version was rushed through as a campaign promise and was purely optics. It was inconsistent with the Equal Protection Clause and was less transparent. Given new court rules and rulings and strengthening of Illinois campaign finance reporting, we have a modification here that is truly legal, the other one wasn't, enforceable, the other one wasn't, and transparent. And this is one more transparent than the other one was, which I don't think really was very transparent. So I thank my fellow council members for taking on the new business item, and especially Commissioner Olson, who worked directly on this almost immediately. We had come up with a final draft probably in less than a half an hour, but then the way council works, it took considerably longer time for discussion and word processing, I guess. I also want to thank our village attorney, Yenza, for her efforts. When I first brought this up, it might never have happened because staff already had a list of about 13 items, and 14 items might be considered too much, but sometimes it's more about quality than quantity. So I look forward to the passage of this new policy that is much better than the old one. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I share the sentiments of Commissioner Waldeck with regard to the constitutional infirmities of the prior policy. I don't think it's necessarily, because we've never actually triggered this policy, I don't think it's imperative that we make a change now, but I'm glad the change is being made in a positive direction. I'd just like to point out that the two principal items that are remaining, the new paragraph 2 has been clarified and expanded to involve related people and related entities that I think brings more individuals, more contributors into the policy so that we've got more transparency rather than less. And what will now be paragraph 3 remains in its entirety, and that requires disclosure of any contributions from contractors to candidates or elected officials, and requires them to agree as part of the contract not to make contributions to folks that are sitting up here or to challengers. And I think that those are significant, and I'm glad that they're remaining. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments? Commissioner White?
Well, first, the provisions in this policy that pertain to the State Board of Elections basically are counterproductive as written. That under Illinois law, any individual can raise up to $5,000 without reporting anything. So if we really wanted true transparency, to compel us to keep a campaign account open to the State Board of Elections is the more transparent route to go. So so 1, 2, and 3 are basically nonsensical and should go. Let me just be very clear that I very definitely oppose the concept of vendor contributions to members of this board. So those who do business with the village should not be contributing to members of this board. That's just black and white. Apparently, under the Citizens United decision, a rule that says that we cannot accept contributions from vendors is very likely unconstitutional. However, our purchasing policy can say the village will not contract with people that give donations. So by removing, we shouldn't be taking that money, period. But a rule that says that the members of this council are prohibited from accepting vendor donations is unconstitutional. Apparently, a rule that prohibits the village from contracting with vendors who make contributions is constitutional. So we get to the same place and don't run afoul of the Constitution. And I believe the other 2 items pertaining to soliciting elected officials either for donations or signatures, nobody better ever do that, because that's just wrong. But I think there's other laws that make that wrong too. And I believe that there are other laws and statutes of Illinois that already prohibit doing that. So in no way does my voting for this endorse or support the idea that anybody associated with elected office should be soliciting any member, any village employee or staff member. That's illegal under a number of other provisions, nor should any candidate or member of this council accept donations from anybody seeking to sign a contract to do business with the village. That's just flat wrong. But the purchasing policy is a better way to protect that. So based on that, I'm willing to vote yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Barnett?
As I indicated last time we talked about this, I totally disagree with this, but that seems to be a recurring theme up here. So I want to touch on how I see this less about trying to convince my colleagues, but explain things to the public. What's proposed here doesn't in fact compel anybody to keep a campaign account open. It says we've got to comply with Article 9 of the Election Code, disclosure and regulation of campaign contributions. Those accounts can in fact be closed. When they're closed, you're not compelled to file again until you've exceeded some thresholds of revenue generation, receipts or expenditures actually. And so the idea that there'd be an account open is certainly, and that would be more transparent, is absolutely true. I mentioned that last time. That was an intriguing concept to me, and I'm not opposed to it. That's not what this does, and that's a problem for me, because the clear intent of this policy, which is important to the next point, but the clear intent of this policy was to prevent, or at least make clear, that people shouldn't be running for office perennially. We have elections every 2 years. These rules were written for residents, not against elected officials. So anytime we make a change up here to make it easier for elected officials, that should be done, in my mind, in light of the effect on residents. It's not our job to set policy that makes it easy for us to operate politically. The plain intent is that we should solicit campaign funds, not from people doing business with the village, not from people employed with the village, and for short periods of time out of the necessity of campaigning. It's not supposed to be a way of life for elected officials. It's not supposed to be the kind of thing where every fall you have a golf outing, and every spring you have some sort of a dinner or a bowling party, and you ding up the guys that give our garbage contracts or our DUI contracts or anything else. I still haven't heard, other than some theoretical ambiguity about federal law, which this is not, nor is it a comment on, I haven't heard any reasons for change. What we've had is about a decade of some rules that made clear what everybody's expectations were, and they were high expectations. They were much higher than the state of Illinois' expectations. I think that's a good thing. I suspect our residents think it's a good thing. During that time, unless my colleagues can help me understand, all I've seen is a little bit of tougher road for us. And I don't think that's wrong. I think that's a good thing. Now, if there's a bunch of us up here who are violating this law or this policy and feel threatened by it, that's a problem. I don't know about it. If there's a bunch of us up here that really wish to do something else, like solicit from vendors or like solicit from employees, or make sure we've got our campaign funds open all the time so they're available to receive funds, then we should say that. This isn't a violation of federal law. This is a self-imposed policy which we can either take or not take. Mayor, you described it one way, not entirely right, but certainly analogous, it's appropriate, to the rules of decorum that we have. It's not a free speech infringement for expectations that this council would engage each other with civility and decorum. There's no infringement of rights there. It's a group that decides how they want to set expectations for each other and for internal behavior. And I think we should do anything we can to keep those expectations much higher than what the rest of the world seems to do. I don't want to lead from behind. And I feel like that's kind of a recurring theme these days. What we did in '07 was try to set out a path that we believed was, I don't know, revolutionary. That's the wrong choice of words. I got a vocabulary breakdown, but certainly was breaking new ground. There are no other communities that have these kinds of rules in place. And this idea of transparency is one worth considering. And I'd love to hear more specific ideas on how we might improve transparency. Maybe it is that we should actually compel the accounts to be open. And maybe it's been compel the accounts to be open and have them filed with the village periodically. That would improve transparency. That's not what this says. That's an important thing for everybody to understand. I don't know what benefit our residents get, which is why we're supposed to be acting and supposed to be making rules, that condones or at least removes the obvious intended prohibitions against these solicitations of vendors, these solicitations of employees. Do we think it's a good idea to allow employees to either contribute or work on or help circulate petitions for elected officials? No. Well, you can't really prevent them from doing it, right? But you certainly can set our own expectations. This is no different than any other law or rule or set of guidelines. It's how do we think we should act? I think we should act much higher in terms of ethics and standards and trying our best to make sure that the impression of impropriety, the appearance of impropriety, is just not part of how we operate. This enforcement question, it can't be enforced. Well, I don't know. We tried to enforce it. Is there a reason? Have I missed an opportunity where we thought we should? I'd like to hear about it. It would be a real shame if we did, but I'm not aware of any. What I think has happened is for the last decade, the elected officials, 2 mayors and a dozen or so of us have tried to follow these rules. The results have been pretty good. There's no way I can vote to lower our standards, even if they are unenforceable, as someone might say, because they send the right message. They're not for us or for our residents, and they tell everybody what we expect of each other and how we expect to engage vendors and people doing business with the village. I would be open to any additional wording from my colleagues that furthered those ends, but all that's really here is an elimination of those expectations. So I'll be a solid no vote on this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Olson?
I think that this is clear that the current policy that we have is unenforceable. It's a violation of the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. What we're proposing to do here is remove unenforceable language, yet retain important items about campaign disclosure, vendor, and through contractual language, continue to prohibit vendors from contributing to candidates for this body, including elected officials. I think that's a good thing. Effectively what we've done here is retained a policy that actually is enforceable. We've removed unconstitutional barriers that have arisen. in order to retain, in order to make this policy something that is actually able to be followed in accordance with the Constitution of the United States. So I think that ultimately this is a good thing for the village, it's a good thing for our residents, it's a good thing for this community. And I look forward to supporting this as we remove unconstitutional parts of policies and continue to have a policy that promotes ethical behavior, that promotes transparent behavior from members of the village council and those seeking to sit on this council in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jose, then Commissioner White.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add a little something. I don't think what we're seeing here is a step back. As has been said, we're removing language that's unenforceable, but that doesn't mean that the expectations of the people up on this dais or the people that are running to sit on this dais should change. And I believe very firmly that the good people of Downers Grove will enforce the ideas behind these items should people start acting otherwise. I have no doubt that if folks are out there soliciting campaign contributions from village employees or trying to obtain their assistance directly in a campaign, that they'll hear about it. I have no doubt that the residents of Downers Grove will be very vocal about that and will hold people accountable. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner White?
Well, actually, I was pointing to Commissioner Jose, but I do have one to make sure that you noticed him. But I do have one very, very brief comment. I don't know how stronger the policy can be than have a purchasing policy that prohibits those vendors who contribute to village council members from having contracts with the village. If a vendor contributes to village council members, they're not eligible to contract with the village. That's how I interpret it, and that's as strong as it can be, and I don't think there's any constitutional impairment to enforcing that.
Thank you. My own views on this is I think it's actually been more heat than there is fire over this issue. And I have the unique, not that unique, but one of the few people who were actually here when we went through this debate the first time when this was enacted back in 2007. I'm going to say things that I said 9 years ago, so it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody. I've always thought that this was never about ethics. And so it's somewhat of a misnomer to call this some ethical standard that is being either stepped before or after or otherwise. It's really about campaign finance and disclosures, what it's always been about. And I don't have the same romanticized notions about this as some do and may get a little emotional about it. But I always viewed this, even when it was first proposed, as a solution in search of a problem. In the 9 years since there, I haven't seen the problem surface, and some will now say, well, see, it's because we passed these rules, but didn't have the problem beforehand. What I have seen is some consequences didn't make a whole lot of sense. This requiring that campaign accounts be closed really did nothing more than reduce transparency in practice and cause some people to have to give up trying to recover campaign debt because you had to close your account and couldn't do anything to just pay back your campaign debt, not about having golf outings every 6 weeks or soliciting employees, but just about breaking even in order to run for basically a non-paying job, and add the sense of deterring some people from running for office. I don't think that was an intended consequence, but it's something that actually happened. And I mean, the reality is there are other things that are going on that I also don't see people asking to change, such as putting a prohibition in here on seeking or obtaining endorsements from unions of public safety employees. But nobody's talking about that. Folks don't seem to have a problem with that issue. And yes, there are employees who I understand off duty in their own time as constituents will do things like circulate petitions for people running for office up here. I don't see a prohibition in here, or if it's being construed as something mandatory that should have been raised, then nobody raised it. I'm also intrigued by the notion that I always thought these were supposed to be mandatory. If you didn't conduct yourself according to this, there would be some consequence. And I was kind of surprised to hear on the 28th that these are just guidelines. Because if they're just guidelines, then I really don't understand the fervor over changing them. What it's really about is about making disclosures. Because if they're really that important, then we should make them mandatory, there ought to be consequences. That's my view. And to say they're guidelines, And then, well, they're not real, they're not enforceable, they're not illegal because they're not really something that we can enforce. They're just guidelines. And that seems to me to be, it's not being very serious about the issue. It's going halfway and not enough. Here's what we have. We have removed some elements of this campaign finance provision that I never thought made sense and didn't like from the day one. And that's the opening and closing accounts. I fully support that. I was of that position back in 2007 when we first discussed this. And you know what? I was in the minority back then, and I voiced my opinion, and then we moved on. So I hope people who are in the minority this time, 9 years later, do the same thing. Some of the other things I've looked at in terms of eliminating the concepts about elected officials not knowingly soliciting or accepting campaign contributions from a village employee or immediate family member of a village employee. I agree that shouldn't happen. I haven't heard anybody said that it should. But you can't, I mean, there are other prohibitions that are going to prevent that from happening. And there are disclosure requirements that have to be made, so people are going to know what's going to go on, and people can draw their own conclusions. This is a very informed, engaged community. They do their homework, and they're going to reach their own opinions about who should or shouldn't be up here based on the information they gather. Elected officials or their agents may not knowingly approach any village employee to seek their signature on a nominating petition. I understand that's happened since this thing was passed, and nobody seemed to get too excited about it. The reality is you can't stop what people do in their own time off duty. They have political rights they get to exercise. Should folks be doing that? No. But I don't think these guidelines are going to help it. In fact, my understanding is they didn't. Elected official prohibited from knowingly seeking or accepting campaign contributions from vendors either doing business with the village or people who are looking to do business with the village and have outstanding RFP responses, RFQ submissions. All right, now we're really talking about what people care about, not the political process, the campaign process, but about people up here perhaps being influenced or being perceived to being influenced by contributions from vendors or people seeking some kind of treatment from this board with respect to either a contract or some request that they have. Absolutely, that should not be happening. But what do we have? We have a purchasing policy, which has been mentioned, that prohibits it. And it'll also have a disclosure requirement. So when you submit to do business with the village, you have to disclose whether you've made any campaign contributions. So there you go, disclosure, publicly known. And this council can decide not to vote on that contract, we can decide not to use that vendor, we can decide not to take that action based on that disclosure. The public also gets that information. Then if you do get a contract, and you say you haven't made any contributions, you do get a contract, you're now prohibited from making a contribution. So they can't make contributions to anybody who's in elected office. But still, we have we still have disclosures that are made with respect to anybody up here before a vote. If they're aware of some contribution's been made, you have an obligation to disclose it. And considering depending on what the circumstances are, recuse yourself from the vote. Information, what is it? The sunlight is the best disinfectant. It's about disclosure and information. And in all the years that we've been up here, I'm not even sure how many times we've even had disclosures because it doesn't happen. So I agree with Commissioner Jose and others. I don't see this as a step backwards. I see this as a refinement of a practice that's been in place in many respects, some of which has been superseded, if you will, by changes in state law in the intervening 9 years. I think some of the sections here never made sense in the first place, and I'm glad to see them go away. I think they just created problems and didn't solve any. But I don't see this as going to be changing the ethical standards of the village of Downers Grove or elected officials. And of course, and this isn't anything other than an observation, almost none of this applies to people running for office who are already elected. I mean, yes, they can be asked or suggested or held to a standard by the electorate in terms of how they conduct themselves, no different than any other election. But these rules couldn't apply to them in any event. They can only apply to village council members. So I don't see it as being a step back. I think it's a refinement, an appropriate one after 9 years of real experience with this. And I don't see that anything's going to materially change or that anyone's going to be harmed by making these changes. And if there are other things that we want to put in about other restrictions, then we can always entertain those. This is hardly something that's carved in stone that can't be revisited and modified when it's appropriate. So I'm, again, as with 7 years ago, after making some changes, I was fine with the consensus. What we have here is for more or less a consensus of what this current council thinks, and I can live with it. With that, roll call, please.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, matter passes 6-1. That brings us to the end of our active agenda and to our item 7, our first reading or our workshop agenda. This is a more informal portion of our meeting where items are presented by staff for consideration and discussion purposes only. No formal action will be taken at this time. We have 4 items on tonight's first reading or workshop agenda. And typically what we'd like to do here is, as opposed to the active agenda, where we've previously discussed the item, here Village Manager David Fieldman or a designee of his will present the item. I'll give the Village Council an opportunity to ask questions first, and then open it up to the audience for any questions before coming back to the council. So with that, Manager Fieldman, good evening.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. Good evening. The first item on tonight's first reading agenda is consideration of an ordinance amending the sale and promotion of liquor. And here to present this item is our village attorney, Enza Petrarca.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening.
Good evening.
An ordinance has been prepared to adopt the state law regarding happy hour provisions. As you may recall, last year, state law was amended to allow the discounting of alcohol during a specific period of time and under certain parameters, as outlined in the manager's memo. The proposed state ordinance also adopts state law, which establishes specific parameters for party packages and removes the prohibition of serving 2 or more drinks to a single person. This ordinance was discussed by the Liquor Commission several months ago, and they recommended adoption. And with that, Mayor, I'd be happy to answer any specific questions.
Thank you. Questions from members of the council? Questions from the audience?
Great.
6B.
Thank you. The next
7B, excuse me.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item is consideration of a resolution, which is a contract with Williams Architects. Here to present this item is our Deputy Village Manager, Mike Baker.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This item would authorize a contract for architectural and engineering services with Williams Architects and provide for all design work involved in the police station renovation and addition project. The scope, budget, and funding sources for this project were established during a lengthy public process, which occurred beginning in September of last year and extending into May of this year, when the council adopted a facility sustainability plan that called for improvements to the police station primarily. The scope of that project, as was discussed a few weeks ago, has since been scaled back as a result of the village's decision to enter into membership in DUCOM and eliminate the need for a 911 dispatch center within the police station. Williams Architects was originally selected following a competitive request for proposal process and has extensive experience with police station renovation projects, along with a history of exceptional performance working with the village of Downers Grove. Mark Bushhouse from Williams Architects is here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one for staff. You mentioned the elimination of the dispatch center because we're going to DUCOM. Is staff confident that the reduction in space is appropriate? My concern is I want to make sure that we measure twice and cut once.
Absolutely. Yes, we did go back and look closely at all aspects of the station to make sure that the space was adequate, and that will continue as we go into the schematic design phase and absolutely ensure that we have enough space in that building to accommodate current and future needs.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Barnett?
Thanks, Mayor. What do we see before us in terms of process should this move forward? Williams Architects gets their work done. Do we see this as a general bid thing? Do we see this as we would hire a construction manager? How do we see that process rolling forward, and how does that relate to Williams' scope in this contract? I guess as I see this going forward, it seems to me the best course would be to have a high degree of connection between Williams and CM, as opposed to sort of an open general bidding process. And I'm wondering if that, I've got a bias against AIA contracts, so I frankly didn't read the whole thing. But as those relate, that would be my preference going forward. Is it kind of set up for that?
Yes, that is correct. The contract actually does call for that delivery method, use of a construction manager, and we're going through the process, actually just started the process right now of competitively selecting that construction manager. That contract will come before council very shortly and be engaged during the design phase to allow for a seamless transition from design into construction.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the council? Questions from the audience? Final questions from the council?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Item 7C.
The final item on tonight's first reading agenda is a motion authorizing a reduction in cash in lieu of park donations for a project that's planned and approved in our downtown. Here to provide background information on this item is our Community Development Director, Stan Popovich.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
As Manager Fieldman noted, we're here to discuss the project 5100 Forest Avenue. You'll recall here it's at the corner of Forest and Gilbert Avenue. It's an 89-unit apartment building. And here's the front elevation for it. The developer is required to pay park and school donations for planned unit development or special use where you're adding residential units per the subdivision ordinance. The total required of park and school donations is approximately $544,000, with approximately $483,000 to the Park District. The subdivision ordinance allows the petitioner to request a reduction in these fees if they're providing their own space for recreation areas and facilities, thus reducing the demand for park services. There's no allowance for reduction in school payment. The petitioner is proposing to install a courtyard here. You can see, if you remember, the building is a U-shaped building, so in the middle of the U is this outdoor patio living space for the residents there. So based on this proposed outdoor space, the petitioner is requesting a reduction of the park and school donation from roughly $483,000 to roughly $373,000. Drew Mitchell with Holiday Properties is here to speak about his request tonight.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome. If you need a moment, feel free.
Well, my name's Drew Mitchell. I'm pleased to be back before this council again. We are here today. We're on the verge of getting started with this project. We're in for a second round of comments. It's been a long time in the making. Met staff, Dave, Stan, about 3 years ago when we acquired this building. We then became aware of the downtown Downers Grove Comprehensive Plan and the plans that the village had for this building. We collaborated with the village and worked very, very hard to identify a development that fit the downtown, that was consistent with the downtown comprehensive plan, and that worked from an economic standpoint. Since that time, we've been before this council to obtain the necessary approvals. It was about a year ago that we were in front of you. We've been working hard on our construction drawings. It doesn't typically take a year to do that. One of the challenges that we had was that we sold a beautiful building to the council. It's been really challenging trying to keep this project inside of the budget. On top of that, when we initiated this process, there were impact fees that were calculated in the ordinance that have changed dramatically since we prepared our going-in budget. And there's a couple emails to that effect that were in the packet. But when we initially started this process, the fees were calculated at about $145,000 for this particular project. And when you go and you really study how those fees are calculated, it's based on a number of factors. There's density equations, there's which really trigger ultimately how many kids you have, and that equates to a school fee. There's clearly a park fee, and the park fee is driven basically based on the need for additional park space for new residents. On the surface, I really have no problem with that. I mean, the idea here is that we're attracting new residents to Downers Grove. As a result, the intent is to maintain a level of park space on a per capita basis. So I totally get it. The challenge that we're faced with here is that we've studied this ordinance. We knew that there was an opportunity to ask for relief should we program a space that would help ensure that our building is a success. And I think that that's what we're all really after here. This site sat vacant for 10 years. Look, it has not been easy to figure out how to develop on this site. And we really are very, very close. But I'm here because of poverty. I'm here because I'm really having trouble making this project work. It's why it's taken us so long to get to this point. I would invite the village council to reasonably consider the fact that when we started this process, fees were approximately 300% less than they are right now. I don't want to be the guy taking money away from the park. I really don't. But I would say this, that 18 months ago, the total fee to the Park District would have been about $145,000. In their budget for 2016, for this particular line item, they planned for approximately $43,000 in fees for this particular line item. Our fee that would be going to the Park District is 11 times their projected budget for 2016. We're asking for a modest reduction in the calculation of this fee. We could have come in and argued based on a large recent purchase of land, which is really what the ordinance is intended to be based upon, a most recent land comp with the Park District, which is approximately half of what it is in the ordinance. We chose not to do that, and I explained why in our letter. You know, the reason why is because there could be broad implications for the village. For every single project that would be going on, if we would have to consider that, it would have an even bigger effect on the park. I also feel that the fact that when we initiated this process in good faith with the village trying to design a building that worked, that fit the downtown, we were relying on an ordinance at that time that has changed. And you know what? That's what happens in government, and I do understand that. So I'm here because we have designed what I think is a killer outdoor amenity deck. It absolutely will reduce our residents' consumption of park services. At the same time, we're still putting almost $350,000 in the Park District's budget that exceeds their budget for this particular item by over $300,000 for the year. If I could describe the amenity deck for you a little bit, this is surrounded by a U-shaped building, as Stan mentioned. There's an outdoor bar and lounge area that's going to have televisions on it. We envision people out there hanging out a lot. We've got 2 lounge areas here. That would be the northeast corner, but if for us, it's the bottom right. In between those are 2 large outdoor televisions. So people are going to be outside. They're hanging out. There's a fire pit. There's TVs. It is going to be cool. We've got a structural fountain that we bought from a sculptor in New York. There's going to be a water element to that. We're shipping that in. We're going to install it. There's a bocce ball court behind that. There's a green area at the western edge, which will function as a dog run with additional lounge spaces. So I'm not here because I want to take money away from the Park District. I will very happily write a check for $343,000, which is what I believe is a reasonable and fair fee in light of the fact that we began this process with a fee that would have been under $150,000, in light of the fact that we have made a major investment or intend to make a major investment in this recreational space. And finally, I would just say this. I did have a chance to review the letter from Superintendent File with the Park District, and I respectfully disagree with his interpretation of the ordinance. It specifically states that when an owner provides their own open space for recreation areas and facilities, it has the effect of reducing the demand for local public recreational services. Depending upon the size of the development, a portion of the park and recreational area in subdivisions or planned unit developments, of which we are, may, at the option of the village council, be provided in the form of private open space in lieu of dedicated public open space. We are in an urban environment. This may not be your typical playground with a swing set, but this is exactly what we're hoping will help attract the empty nesters and the millennials that we believe want to live in downtown Downers Grove, the millennials that we want to incubate as future homeowners in Downers Grove. I'm passionate about this. I'm on the cusp of having a project work, and I'm fighting for every nickel to get this building going. So that's why I'm here today, and I really hope that you can reasonably consider this request. Thank you.
Thank you for presenting on that. Anything further from Staff for the petitioner?
Not at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions from the village council before going to the audience. Commissioner Olson?
Thank you, Mayor. Could I just inquire of staff on a couple points? I think Commissioner Jose and I were speaking earlier in the day, and we were discussing the nature of this fee, or this payment in lieu. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about these payments. It was noted that the total payments for this building to park and schools, both, and we're talking about both school districts, 58 and 99, would be somewhere north of $500,000. Is that right?
Yeah, the total is just under $544,000.
Okay. But the vast majority goes to the park district and not the schools. I wanted to understand the rationale behind our subdivision ordinance, behind that.
Like most subdivision ordinances throughout the country, all subdivisions are required to donate land to park and school districts. The idea being exactly what Mr. Mitchell talked about, providing a certain amount of space or school space on a per capita basis or a per student basis. These calculations were originally done in the 1980s by the city of Naperville and have been used nationwide since that time. So our ordinance has that requirement in it.
So the calculations, by the calculations, you don't mean these dollar amounts, you mean the calculation based on the amount of space.
I mean the calculation of acres of land on a per unit or per bedroom basis.
Okay.
Our ordinance, like most ordinances, again, throughout the country, allow for a payment of cash in lieu of a land donation when a subdivision is too small and would result in such a small space of land that it really wouldn't effectively address the needs of the community. The way you turn the acres into cash is to apply a fair market value of land in our community on a dollar per acre basis. For many, many years, that land value stayed the same, I think going back to at least the 1990s, possibly even further. In 2014, with the update of our subdivision code, we increased the cash value of land on a per acre basis to match that of what we see in most purchases throughout residential properties in our village. That explains the dramatic increase in that price. It was probably best described as a long overdue increase to reflect the current market conditions.
So that increase you're talking about from the increase in the value of land, which is defined in our ordinance. So the value of land is a number that's defined in our ordinance.
Yes.
That's not defined through some sort of appraising or any of that nature.
That is correct. We came about that number by looking at actual purchase of land in all of the areas of the village, and that number makes some sense based on market values in 2014.
Does that purchase number update automatically, or would it have to be updated again by ordinance if it were to be changed in the future?
It does not update automatically. It requires an active action by our council.
Okay. So when Mr. Mitchell discusses that the cost of these fees increased by over 300% from when he first started looking at the project, that's due to the fact that we updated this value in 2014, 2 years ago.
Yes, driven almost exclusively by the change in land value.
So at that time, we did not change the per acre calculations for park or schools.
There may have been some very minor modifications to the acre per land use or per unit because we did update our subdivision code at the time. But this change in fees, as Mr. Mitchell described, is driven nearly primarily by the change in land value.
Okay. Is it common practice, have the tables, the amount of acreage, have those numbers on a sort of a nationwide trend or even a statewide or local area trend, have those numbers changed significantly since this study referenced in the 80s in Naperville?
I know that table used to be updated almost annually, and the communities chose whether or not to include it in their subdivision updates. I haven't looked at that data recently. I can tell you that based on memory, the table of land donation requirements changed slightly in 2014. But again, it was the land value that changed more than the tables themselves.
Okay, so we did update the table.
Yes, we did.
And that was based on the
Research at that time.
research at that time to bring us in line with what other communities were doing.
That's correct.
Okay, so that explains quite a bit to me. One of the things that I had thought about is, yes, the $543,814.40 is the total cash in lieu donation, but, you know, the vast majority, $483,491.20 is going to the Park District. That's a large, when I saw that, I thought about the number of units. It's a very, very significant amount of money comparatively to the other two entities that we're discussing.
And that's driven primarily by the type of unit and size of unit. What that really says is we don't expect an increase in the demand for school space, but we do expect an increase in the demand for public recreational space.
Would this calculation, for example, if they were to build a subdivision of single-family homes, would that significantly change the proportion of park to school?
Yes, drastically.
Okay. So that would impact, basically, that would have the purpose of increasing the school proportionally to the park.
That's correct. It goes by housing unit type and down to the number of bedrooms within each unit. So if you had a subdivision of 5-bedroom, single-family houses, the cash in lieu of land donation to school would be substantially more.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Commissioner Barnett?
I want to understand the timing more clearly. Our change, I'm looking at our ordinance here. So we've got $545,000 in there. What was the timing of that change?
It was in conjunction with the subdivision ordinance rewrite. I believe it was around 2014. December of 2014.
So reading the note that we got concerning this from the applicant, it sounded like there was a change in that number after they came to us to try and do the project. And I'm having hard to square it up. If it's a 2014 adjustment, then why wasn't that more clearly known in August of 2015?
We informed all developers we were working with of the change. So I can't speak for this particular developer. I believe they owned the property prior to the change.
On the property
They had
prior to
sought
the
other
change.
development concepts prior to that. You may recall they were looking to remodel the former TCF bank site with a drive-through. They were looking for other types of tenants. They've owned it for quite a while before they came forward. That's the collaboration and exploration exercise that Mr. Mitchell was talking about.
So, Mr. Mitchell, I apologize, I'm still having a hard time following it. Your note seemed to suggest in my reading that this was something that you hadn't planned on, but I think I'm hearing that the method of calculation that we were using has been consistent since 14.
I became aware of the change in May of 2015. We came before this council in June of 2015. So that's approximately the timing. We had set a budget at that point in time. We had relied on a different number. You know, I kind of laugh at Commissioner Jose, you know, measure twice, cut once. You know, the measurement really did change. When we came before this council with our proposal for this particular project, there's a note in that we desired to come back and seek council consideration for relief based on potentially a change in per acre value, which I believe would market value is approximately $300,000 an acre, and or credit for private open space. So we had always intended to come and make this presentation. Honestly, it's uncomfortable. I don't want to be before this council asking to reduce park fees. But guys, they're substantial. I mean, we got almost $500,000 in fees on a project that we've been working our tails off trying to get it going. And so you're correct on the timing, Commissioner Barnett, that by the time we came in and finally got our approvals, this ordinance had already passed. But It doesn't mean that we weren't relying on an old ordinance schedule as we contemplated the project, designed the project, engaged architects, hired market study consultants. It also doesn't mean that you, as a village council, aren't entitled to follow the ordinance, which invites you to consider relief based on an owner providing private open space. We aren't even asking for credit for what I would consider potentially public open space for a municipal sidewalk connection to municipal Lot D. That's very expensive for us, to build that along the north side of our property. We have grade issues at the northwest corner of our property. We have to put in an ADA ramp to that municipal lot. We have really tried hard to get a development going here that satisfies, in some cases, pretty opinionated village. And also a comprehensive plan that was very, very defined as far as what the village envisioned for this site. And you know what? We sharpened our pencil and we worked hard to get to this point. So what I hope you can walk away with is that these guys aren't in here saying, let's go and look at this comp at $300,000 an acre. Let's cut that fee in half, and then let's ask for private open space credit, and let's throw in the municipal parking lot. I'm in here, I'm looking for $500,000 to get my project going, and I'm hoping to get $100,000 out of this, and still pay what I consider to be an extremely sizable $350,000 fee for a project of this size. As Commissioner Olson pointed out, it's substantial on a per unit basis. So, sorry. Your question though, timing, you're absolutely right. When this council approved our project, the new ordinance was already in effect.
Let's say for the record, I remember that caveat was added. Actually, I do remember that was something that they would reserve the right to bring up in the future. Can I go now, Mary? Anybody else?
I just want to make sure Commissioner Barnett was finished.
Almost. There's, not unlike our conversations, I'm losing track, but as far as Maple and Maine, there's a very real, very large value to our downtown and our broader village finance structure, that this project moves forward, kind of post-haste, frankly. And so I'm inclined to try and find a way to work something out. I don't know what that looks like, and I'd certainly be interested to hear the rest of my colleagues speak to the subject. The thought in my mind right now is that this is a reasonable ask, but I'd like to somehow tie some kind of performance to it. I don't really want to be having the conversation about where are we and when is this going to get wrapped up, 2 years from now or 3 years from now. I think everybody wants to move. As I understand it, Holiday Properties certainly wants to move. But it's a big deal that we move sooner rather than later to our village in a host of ways beyond just the fact that we have to be able to look at a building there and have some new residents. There's some real financial implications to the village, and sooner rather than later has a very real value to our finances. So I'm inclined to try and find a way to work something out, but I'd like to at least explore the opportunity of having it tied to some kind of a timely performance. I'm finished now, Mayor.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner White?
Well, first, let me start off by saying that I'm not sure I see a case made for an exception in this case. I have considerable sympathy for the developer. They make a credible case. But I'm not sure how I can support allowing a reduction in this instance and then not allowing a reduction for numerous other projects that will be coming forward. That said, I am troubled by the potential chilling effect that the park donations have on attracting developers in general. I was not on the council when the change was made to the subdivision ordinance. Even with 5-bedroom houses, if I'm reading this in the right way, even if somebody were to build a 5-bedroom house, the park district would still get more than although maybe there's two parts to it. But the park district's getting a very lucrative donation in all instances. And I have not yet seen the calculations that underlie that. For example, I don't believe additional land is needed. I believe additional programs would be called for. So the idea of contributions and donations makes sense. I'm not sure they have to buy any more land. So to basically follow up with what Commissioner Barnett said, I mean, the idea of giving relief to any developer, I'm not saying I would end up voting in favor of doing that, but I just don't have the background on how the park donation fee system was calculated. The school fee system seems so much smaller in comparison, but I just don't know how that was calculated. Based on what I've seen, I'm not prepared to make an exception, but I am prepared to consider whether the donation system is fair in general. I'm not offering an opinion because that hasn't been, that information hasn't been presented as to how the entire system was set up in the first place.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Jose?
Thanks, Mayor. A couple questions for the developer and then for staff. You mentioned the timing and that you engaged various service providers. I'm wondering what the timing of that was. At what point I know you had different concepts. At what point did you settle on this concept and start hiring people to put the plan together?
There's an email that should be contained in your packet that's, I think I start off my email to Stan as we're having an uh-oh moment. You know, we've learned that we're about to come in before this council with our proposed dramatic redevelopment of this particular site. That meeting was at that point most likely scheduled. We had already engaged architects for schematic design to come up with the pretty pictures that we need to convey the development proposed. So at that point in time, we weren't thinking about trying to put a Dunkin' Donuts on the old TCF Bank site. We were bought in to the downtown comprehensive plan and trying to figure out a way to make a project work at this particular site that fit within that pretty tight puzzle piece of key catalytic site B in the downtown plan. So it absolutely caught us by surprise. We opted to punt on it and carefully left a door open so that we could come back and make this request. And honestly, my hope was that we wouldn't need to, but we do. So, but as far as timing's concerned, you know, the building that we're looking at, this building that we're dying to build was what we were in front of the council seeking when we learned of this issue. And I'm very pregnant on this site, using a phrase that we use often in our business. I have so many dollars wrapped up in this project. What you probably can't see is the anxiety that I have as a result of construction prices increasing, as a result of subcontractors being so very busy. That's not your problem. That's my problem. But I do believe that this ordinance was written in this way for the specific reason, the express ability of somebody to come in and say, look at what we're building. It's great. It adds to the amenity level for this building. It attracts a higher quality resident to this particular development. It's encouraging this kind of behavior. As a result of this ordinance, we have designed this, what I think is a very special outdoor space. I can't afford it if I'm not able to figure out a way to construct this building. So I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
What I'm thinking of is the specific timing. So if I've got the right email that you referenced here, you specifically reference a November 2014 plan application. Is that the point at which you were in front of the Plan Commission?
I came and I met with Tom DeBreiner, I believe, Stan Popovich, the building department. We received a building application that was intended to guide our development process and also help us understand the fees for the project. I did not learn until May of 15, approximately 30 days prior to my coming in front of this council, that ordinance table had changed. I believed that at the time, because I was aware of the Maple transaction for 14 approximate acres at $300,000 an acre, that there would be a reasonable case down the road to argue based on that. I'm concerned about precedent. I have a competitor up the street. I don't want him in here asking for that either. Okay, so I'm aware of the implications of that. If I were a council person, what I would try to rationalize is the fact that we had somebody that really worked their tail off to try to figure out a development in collaboration, and I would, hats off to Stan and to Dave and the team for helping us figure this out, but we absolutely designed this building with a different fee structure in mind. And I hope that you can consider that we're not in here making a greedy request. I don't mean to diminish the value of $100,000, but boy, it means a lot to me getting my project out of the ground, and I've got a park district where this is 11 times their budget for this particular line item. So it means more if we want to see this happen to this particular project than it may necessarily mean for the park. I would also note that the park recently auctioned off some land. And I would invite the council to look at the respondents. This was a pretty nice piece of property, and see what the market dictated as far as the values that the market commanded in their responses to that particular auction. And I would suggest that it was significantly below $540,000 an acre. So I recognize that this ordinance gets updated only occasionally. They say better to be lucky than good. In this particular case, we were unlucky. It changed on us. So what are we doing? We're coming in saying, guys, your ordinance says that we can come in and ask for relief on 5 or 6 different things. There's one that we really did a good job on, and it's our outdoor space. It's a recreational space. I truly, genuinely believe that it will reduce our resident consumption of park space. I really do. I think people are going to be hanging out there. And that's the way the ordinance reads. So if we want to take a very deliberate read of the ordinance, I think we nailed it here. I think this is exactly what it was designed for.
A question for staff, following up on a couple of things Commissioner Olson asked. What properties or what types of property were used to arrive at $540,000 an acre?
We looked at the types of properties that the park district had been purchasing up until that point, a couple years prior. So we looked at value of residential properties throughout the village and all the quadrants, if you will. I remember looking at and sort of averaging out those land purchase prices, not specifically what the park district had purchased, but land and house sales in the area based on actual data at that time.
Okay.
Does the same breaker cost apply to the schools and the park district?
Yes.
Just to continue with a few thoughts, thank you for that. I kind of agree at this point with Commissioner White that I'm not entirely convinced that this is the kind of space that's envisioned with regard to the ordinance and the exception that the petitioner is seeking. That said, I'm not sure that there aren't other avenues. And that's why I asked about the value of the property. And I am sensitive to construction costs. I know through personal experience, through my day job, how busy subcontractors are at this point. It's a good thing, I think, for all of us, unfortunately, except it seems for folks like you. But I am interested to hear if there are other ways that we can change this. I mean, if the formula for determining what the donation should be is flawed, then it's something that we should consider. If it's acting as truly a barrier to development in our town, then it's something that we should consider. Perhaps it's a longer conversation, I don't know, but I am interested in having. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you. I have a very difficult time making exceptions. And I envision that if we do, we're going to have a line on the left saying, we're different. We put grass and dirt in, and we're going to allow dogs on it, and now we have a dog park, so we should get money back. I have difficulty with that. The formula, if the formula is flawed, that's one thing. And if we have to change it, then it should be changed retroactively if it was indeed flawed. But I don't want to start a precedent where developers start coming in and they start saying, well, our people don't drive, so you don't need parking, and they don't need any other transportation because there's a train nearby, and we hired a traffic guy who says there won't be any additional traffic, and garbage, well, we'll kind of and this occurs again and again, and now we're going to get into, gee, give us a break on impact fees, make an exception. And I don't want to get into that because it's not a good road to follow. I don't think that these particular amenities, if they were open to the public, maybe. But they're private. They're also a sales pitch. They're an inducement to rent apartments or to buy condos. I lived in one place where they put in years ago a computerized driving range. You can practice your driving. I mean, there's amenities that you offer that entice people to come to live in a particular neighborhood or development. And it's also it's a sales pitch. So that there's a private gain from making these type of amenities. Also, prices go up, and the supplies that you need to build, the trade construction, and those things are going up. They aren't going to come down, but the first choice is to come to a government entity and say, we need to come to you for relief. I just have a lot of questions and considerations to make about this. I'm not totally, I'll consider it. But I will agree that if it is flawed, then we should correct it and make it retroactive. But I'm not willing to go one on everybody lining up and saying, well, we're different, we should be treated differently, and it's just a road I don't want to see a council go down in the future. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to, I suppose to borrow a phrase, revise and extend my remarks. And I want to thank Commissioner Waldeck for pointing it out. Flawed was the wrong word for me to use, and that's not to, I don't mean to take anything away from what you said, but hey, I said what I said. I didn't mean to imply that there was something necessarily broken about it, but that there might be a better way to calculate it. If we should update it with regard to the value per acreage, then let's update it based on more recent data, is what I intended to say. Thanks, Mayor.
Sure. Commissioner Barnett?
There's sort of, I'm hearing kind of two conversations. One is about our ordinance, our subdivision ordinance, and its methodology, and that's certainly worth reviewing. But I guess I find a little bit of sympathy here that isn't quite the expectation that everybody would be lining up. We changed the rules kind of midstream, and we didn't change them in a market. We changed them driven by the market, but because we hadn't touched them in however long, it was way more than anybody would reasonably expect on an annual basis for increase. We tripled them, right? 3.5 times, something like that. And that's a big deal. And I guess I'm less sympathetic to the space. I mean, I think the point that it's a private space is important. The point that it's a selling fact is absolutely important. I'm kind of sympathetic to our role in legislating an environment that people operate in, and we changed the rules. We changed the rules on them, and to a really big number. We didn't say, man, it's not like our normal fee structure where we look at kind of costs and actual costs and try and recoup them. We tried to cover a lot of ground in one fell swoop, and it differentiates this potentially. I mean, there may be others that started in October and November and didn't get moving until after January 1st, and I would feel similarly about them. But it doesn't mean that recognizing that lays the groundwork for everybody to make the same case, because it's a very narrow case to be made. If you were operating with establishing designs and establishing pro forma and talking with our village planning staff under one set of rules and the rules got changed, and then I think there ought to be a little sympathy up here. But that necessarily creates a very discrete audience. It isn't sort of every developer that comes along and has problems making his numbers work later. It's a really big differential. So I'd encourage folks to give that a little bit of thought too. There may be a way to differentiate what's going on here from the the fear that you set a precedent that applies to everybody.
I just want to add some clarity to that timeline. It's true that Holiday Properties had owned this particular parcel for quite a while before we even were contemplating the change. Had a meeting with representatives from Holiday Property on November 12th of 2014 when they were deciding whether or not to make an application to the village for an apartment complex. At that time, they expressed concern in general about cost and the specificity of our land use recommendations in our comprehensive plan, and we talked informally about TIF incentives, sales tax rebates, and other types of issues at that time. I did give them a heads up at that meeting that we were contemplating this change in our subdivision code and it was likely to dramatically increase. So they did own the property prior to that, but prior to November of 2014, they had not made an application of this type of land use. They were working with other types of land use. So for the entire time that they were contemplating the apartment type of development, this was a known fee.
Commissioner Olson? I'm sorry. Make sure you were-
No, I'm finished.
Commissioner Olson?
You know, thanks to the staff and everyone for answering the questions. What Commissioner Barnett just kind of outlined was somewhat compelling to me. Yeah, I think this is something we should update more often than once every 20, 30 years. I think that value, but that's a side issue, and I think we have a formula that's been a couple years old. Was updated to general standards at the time. So, I really don't see a heavy need to reinvestigate the whole thing. But I understand Commissioner Barnett's point. The exploration phase, I'm sympathetic to the fact that them coming before the council with plans is more of towards the end of that part of the step of the process versus it's not like they just showed up with the idea and showed up at the village council. They put a lot of effort, drawings and such, and there's a long process there. And so therefore, what Commissioner Burnett said was compelling to me, that in this case, because I don't want to set precedent, said that everything, but this case does seem to pose some unique precedent to me, or not a precedent, but a unique situation that's not precedential, unless there were other projects unknown, but and given the importance of this site to our community, I do want to do what we can to make this work. And so that's very important to me, that we're setting, obviously we're setting expectations that throughout the process, and I think for a number of recent developments we haven't had this issue because most of them were first even contemplated after this change was made, so it was a known quantity, et cetera. It was known since the beginning. If they're speaking with you in November of 2014, that's before the change is made, we may have said, likely to significantly increase. Well, significantly increase or substantially increase, when I hear that in my business, that's, 10 to 20%. Now it's my business and we got low inflation and such, but so I think the expectation piece is important to me here. So that's why I'm kind of agreeing with what Commissioner Barnett outlined with regard to the unique situation here. My one challenge on that is, how does that work with our ordinance? And that's my, I guess, my holdup, or because obviously I don't want to set some large precedent that everybody's going to start lining up and say, oh, well, my amenity deck is better than yours and such. But I also think that there's some situational issue here, so.
So there's two issues to consider. One is, as Mr. Mitchell noted, our ordinance, our subdivision code does allow for this very request. So this concept of somebody could come in and say, look, I have these types of amenities that may reduce the impact on public park usage and demand is entirely appropriate and is described in our subdivision code. If the council would like to grant this request, we would have to follow up with amendments to the ordinances that approved the actual development. We had actually specified the fees in the ordinance itself. So as a follow-up item, if the council approves this motion, then we'll come back with the actual ordinance changes that affect only this development, not the ordinances that apply to everybody, the ones that approved this development.
That's all I've got.
Commissioner Fatima.
I think you make a compelling argument, and I do think that this is a special circumstance, and I do not want to set precedents either, or be fearful of what's going to come before us. I mean, I think we need to look at this project closely. There's been a lot of time and effort put into it. I tend to agree with Commissioner Barnett and Commissioner Olson that I think we should take some strong consideration here and discuss it a little further and not just say, this is what you owe and that's it. So I think we do need to look at it again.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck?
I'd like to know how unique this situation really is. When we were contemplating, when we voted on this, how many projects were in the hopper, that the possibilities of not just the big projects, but the, others that are out there. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to look at permits in that during that time frame and come up with, and let us know how unique this really is. How many others may line up or not.
And the situation being, they held title to the land and were looking for a permit subject to the subdivision code. So that would be special uses, plan developments, and subdivisions, where they had title to the land prior to the code change. I can tell you without doing the research, that's going to be a very, very short list.
Well, I'll take the short list then.
Well, similar question, has such a petition ever been asked for before, based on that exception in the code?
Not to my...
Not since I've been here.
You think there's other communities where they...
This is one of my questions.
Are there other communities in which...
We can ask around. I've been in the business since 1989, even back in my intern days in another suburb, and I have never seen this request actually come forward.
And why is that provision in the code?
Now that it's infill, I think it's kind of old code from now that it's infill development, it doesn't come into play as much.
I guess this will hopefully be my last comment. I'm glad I don't have to decide this evening.
Thanks. I have a few questions. One was there, we ever had a request under subdivision control ordinance 20.300.B.3? And so this is a case of first impression is what we're talking about. All right, that's helpful. The question I have is this the only procedural venue by which this relief can even be requested? And what I mean by that is 20.300.B.3 of our subdivision control ordinance, credit for private open spaces and recreation areas.
I believe so.
This is the only procedural venue by which a petitioner could make this kind of request.
I believe so.
All right, that's one question. Next question is, and I don't need to know the answer right now, but with respect to the pool deck that's contemplated for Main and Maple, remind me, I don't need to know right now, whether any similar requests have been made. The reason why I ask is because this particular section of our ordinance specifically talks about swimming pool development and suggests that there's other criteria that we could look at as adopted by the Downers Grove Park District that could be used in guidance for this decision. So if we were talking about a pool, we might have some more guidance to give us an idea of how to resolve this under the ordinance. The language that strikes me, and this is another question I have, and I don't need an answer right now, but going forward, is there's a sentence that states, in general, a substitution of private open space for dedicated parks will imply a substantially higher degree of improvement and the installation of recreational facilities, including equipment by the owner as part of the owner's obligation. Again, this is a question. Is there anything in our precedent or in our code that will help us understand what is meant by recreational facilities in this context? Because I know what a swimming club is, I know what a swimming pool is, but recreational facilities is not even defined in this paragraph. It might be defined elsewhere. But that would be helpful to me, because what's on the table is not a request to change the way we calculate land values or how we do park modifications or determine fees for schools or whatnot. That may be a separate topic I'll come to in a second. What we're being asked is a very specific request under a very specific provision of our subdivision control ordinance that I've been looking at for the better part of 20 minutes now. And the question that this has never been done before suggests that we may need to have some more information about what some of these things mean and what they don't mean, so that we can make an informed decision based upon our current ordinance. Problem being is that we may look at it now and say, well, gee, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z, but that's not what our code says, or does say it. But I think we need some more information to help guide the decision. At least I need some more information to help me in this area, and so I'll be looking forward to that in the future. Separate apart, and this is the part where we go off and talk about things that have nothing to do with the petitioner, so I'm going to give you that green light right now. If this has highlighted, maybe it hasn't, but if this has highlighted this to any degree that we have a current situation that is operating or could operate as an impediment to future economic development, whether it's in our downtown or elsewhere, that we should be looking at from a code or policy standpoint, that may be something we want to flag to do down the road. Maybe that's not what we're talking about here, but I've heard enough to suggest that it's a question I want to ask. And it also raises another crazy idea in my mind. This is what happens when I get to sit here and think about it long enough. We have these provisions, and it may not be increasing them, it may be additional distributions beyond parks and schools. But one thing we've always been talking about as part of our historic development and historic preservation initiatives, enhancements, is where do we come up with funding for this stuff? And in terms of, again, I'm not talking about more dollars, but more division of dollars. Whether we want to, if we do look at our ordinance down the road, whether there's any ability, I guess would be the first question, to have, I mean, we're talking about recreation, and we heard comments earlier tonight about what can we do to help preserve historic places and things in our community. One of our challenges always is, where does the funding come from? Going forward, is this a potential opportunity to the extent we make any revisions to this schema? Is there a legal and appropriate way to, again, I'm not talking about adding new fees, but maybe redistributing some of the ones that would be otherwise collected and paid towards something that we've heard a great deal from both this council and this community is of great importance to investing in. I think you know what I'm getting at. But that was the one that was completely off topic of anything to do with this.
I like that idea, Mayor.
Second.
Anything else from the council before I ask for questions or comments from the audience? All right, I'll come back to the council. Any questions or comments from the audience? Hello again.
Good evening again, Mayor, council, staff. I'm Gordon Goodman, 5834 Midoff. And yes, there are several comments I'd like to make. First, yes, I've been asking for 20 years before 2014 for the village to revise that nominal value of an acre of land in Downers Grove. And it certainly had changed over the years. With 2020 hindsight, I could now say you could have eliminated some problems by changing it more gradually over the years. And I agree with the comment that was made that it would be quite reasonable to do it more often in the future. The second point I wanted to make is that this is a very important economic component of the TIF district. if this project is successfully implemented, it will help greatly with the TIF. Therefore, the village has a very substantial economic interest in making sure that this project can move forward well. And if the cost considerations and the other factors are making it difficult, maybe the village does want to look for various ways to, you might say, subsidize this development. But I don't think you should do it at the expense of the Park District. If the village thinks it's in our community's best interest to do this and wants to find a subsidy, it should be done out of the village resources, in my judgment. The TIF, as I understand it already, it takes revenue away from the park and school districts and devotes it to TIF development purposes for a certain length of time. I think you just had a meeting about that subject, and I don't know the subject, what topics were discussed at that meeting, but I think you should keep that in mind as well. Now, getting to the idea of this particular amenity, that's the next topic that I'd like to talk about. The amenity that is pictured on this screen looks more like someone's patio in private development or a roof garden in New York at my son and his family's home. That's exactly the sort of thing that is on the roof. It's not something that would be regarded as open space. It is an amenity for the residents of that area. It does not substitute for recreational facilities within the community that the new residents in the area would want to have access to and are entitled to access to as taxpayers. The idea of the donation to the Park District is to take some of the burden of providing facilities for the new residents who come into the community off of the shoulders of the taxpayers who are already there. And so I think you have to think very carefully about the whole logic behind the school and park donation, rather than just say, well, this particular building, because it has a patio, really doesn't have to bear its full weight as far as providing recreational facilities in the community for the new residents that are going to come to the community through living in this new building. So it's a very thick thicket that you are beginning to explore if you say, well, in order to meet the financial needs of this particular development, maybe we can look at this crossways and say that this is really open space that they're providing, whereas someone else might look at it and say, well, that's a very nice patio. For the number of people who are coming into this building, how many square feet of patio space is provided for each resident? Does that really substitute for a ball field or a tennis court or what other recreational facilities the Park District is supplying? The sort of things that Lincoln Center has with classes, and I don't think it does at all. So this is a very ingenious way of looking for more money to support this development, but I don't think it's something that the village should agree with. If the village does feel that more money is needed to support this development, then, as I suggested, you should look for it through some other financial arrangements or subsidies that the village does on its own, not at the expense of the Park District. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the audience?
That's all we have tonight, Mayor, on...
We have more questions from the audience.
Oh, sorry. didn't see
And
that.
then we've got more questions from council.
Yeah, Bob Peterson, 6861 Camden Road, Downers. And I remember when this project first was put on a drawing board up here on the screen, and I had brought up some comments in regards to it, being that I own Livenguth Moving and Stores for the last 43 years, I think. And I had some questions in regards to the delivery aspect, parking on Forest Avenue, or not Forest, on Gilbert, allowing a truck to make a delivery at rush hour. There's not going to be enough room because there's only 2 or 3 parking spaces, which is not big enough. If anything was taken into consideration, or I'm just spouting off steam just to say something, the garbage pickup was an issue. How do you get garbage out when it's 10 below zero and keep those cans outside without getting in and rolling them into the street? And then one thing I don't understand with all these projects that are being developed over here, a lot of communities, and especially in Chicago and stuff like this, are making these buildings wheelchair accessible, where these aren't. Even in the codes presently, when you build a house, only the front door has to be 3 feet wide. Now, if you're in bed, and this project right here is trying to attract singles and empty nesters.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Peterson, but all we're talking about tonight is a request under the subdivision control ordinance 20.300.B.3 with respect to the Park District donation. So the issues you're talking about really...
I was just bringing up some ideas that, if anybody listened to, that I had before.
Well, I recall very clearly bringing up those issues when we actually voted on the project some time ago. All we're talking about tonight is this one little request. So with all due respect,
Okay.
if you have some comments on that aspect of it, the Park District donation?
Well, I think it's wrong. My own
That would be an
personal
opinion on that topic.
because the Park District shouldn't be getting anything. They're entitled to too much money already, and half of Downers Grove is Park District property. How many thousands of
Mr.
acres
Mitchell
do
very
they
happy.
need? That's all. Give them this project.
Damning with faint praise, I think that's what it's called. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Mayor. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you. Quick thought. When specifically are the impact fees payable?
Prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Okay, the building permit, not occupancy or anything. I'm thinking in terms of possibly collecting the money as due, but allowing an extension of time. This project, if built, will certainly last more than 10 years or 15 years, 20 years. They're a long time. So, and since the Park District, it was mentioned that the Park District budget is not really set up to take a massive amount of money right away, maybe there
Sure they'd find a way.
might find a way to have a loan or an extension or something where it is payable, but maybe not at that specific time. Just a thought. I don't know if we could pull it off.
Commissioner Ozark.
Thanks, Mayor. You'd made a comment earlier, Mayor, about this being you can correct me if I'm wrong, the only vehicle for this kind of relief, except, well, it might be with regard to the open space, but there is 20.300.D.2 with regard to the fair market value calculation. I think the petitioner referenced it. If the $545,000 is not correct and they go through, there is an appeal process for them to submit information, including an appraisal. Now, appraisals aren't cheap, but there is a mechanism to appeal that particular number as well, should this not go forward.
Thank you. I'm going to take a look at maybe some other ways to go through the door or not through the window. Other questions from the council? All right, well, thank you for the question to the audience. Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, as mentioned, we don't take any action on this tonight. And now I think that's the end of the first reading of the workshop agenda. No worries.
That is fair, thank you.
I think I can count on one finger how many times you've done that.
I hope to stop at the end of this meeting.
That brings us to item 8, the mayor's report. I have no report tonight. Item 9, back to you.
We do have a report under the manager's report tonight, Mayor. We provide quarterly reports to the village council and community. Here tonight for the second quarter report of 2016 is our finance director, Judy Butney.
Good evening, Ms. Butney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
We're all prepared to be, you're going to make us very happy.
Yes. As Dave mentioned, we have the second quarter general fund results for the 6 months ended June 30th. If we start with revenues, the budget was $46.29 million. We would have expected to be at $23.91 at this point in time. We actually came in at $23.97. So we were favorable to the budget by $60,000. Pretty close to where we thought we'd be. Sales taxes are tracking over budget by about $150,000. The revenues that are tracking under budget are income tax, $50,000, and personal property replacement taxes, $30,000, with all other revenues at or near budgeted levels. Moving on to the general fund expenses, that budget is also $46.3 million, and through the second quarter, we would have expected to be at $22.1 million, and actually we're at $21.6, favorable to budget by about $500,000. This is due primarily to payroll-related costs, more turnover, staff turnover than was anticipated, because as you know, most general fund expenses, 80% of general fund expenses are payroll-related. The monthly investment report, you can see up here, contains detail on the village's cash and investments and is posted on the website if you'd like to look at the details. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All good news tonight on our quarterly report, and that ends the manager's report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Very good. That brings us to item 10, village attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. Only one item to present this evening, and that is an ordinance amending the sale and promotion of alcoholic liquor. It will be on the August 2nd active agenda.
Thank you. Brings us to item 11, councilmember reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to share with the audience either items of interest to the community or other goings-on, or actually to relate something in their liaison roles. Commissioner Barnett.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner White.
No report.
Commissioner Olson. No report. Commissioner Fatimo.
No report.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. Real briefly, I want to thank you for the last couple of moments of silence at the last couple of meetings for the officers who have been killed. It's regrettable that we have to do things like that. And you mentioned the officers that were killed in Baton Rouge. Unfortunately, there was another killed in Kansas City earlier today, and I just wanted to mention that, and I hope we keep the community in Kansas City, Kansas, and the officer's family in our thoughts, and hopefully the country can begin to heal a bit. Thanks, Mayor.
Well, thank you for adding that. I was disconnected from the news all day today, and that is distressing to hear. I have nothing further. I still have no report. And with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Patino?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you and good night.